We are live. What's up, everybody? Today we're going to talk about crowd psychology, and in particular Gustav Le Bon, because I feel like this is something that's is extremely important, and I feel like the more we understand how crowds and groups and collective movements are controlled, the more we can stay away from them, the more we can stop being manipulated by them, and I think that's truly the way we break out of the way the world is going right now. I feel like everybody's kind of scared. There's this overall air of anxiety and stuff like that. And most people they look for safety, they look for comfort in numbers. But I think we have to return to that very, very famous Gandhi quote, which is be the change you want to see in the world. That everything starts with you, that if you can resist the programming, if you can resist the propaganda, then you can put your best foot forward into the world and inspire others to do such as well. And most of these systems, you give them power by participating. To oppose somebody is actually to strengthen their argument. And what I mean by that is if you're a critic of somebody, then they have to fight that much harder in order to justify their existence. And in fact, they can point to you and say, well, this person is this, this, and this, and they don't agree with me, so that must make me right. And it's this constant battle. It's this Hegelian dialectic that doesn't lead anywhere. And it's just I just want you to break out of these habits. I want you to break out of these cycles. A lot of what I've been talking about is Gurdjieff recently, and this goes hand in hand with Gurdjieff's idea of man is machine and man is unconscious and man is guided in all sorts of directions by all sorts of forces. But it's only when he becomes conscious that he is able to control his life for the first time. And Gurdjieff had this interesting idea as well that people weren't really responsible for their actions because they weren't conscious enough to be responsible. It's like getting mad at a child for doing something they didn't know better. It's that sort of way of things. Gurdjieff basically believed that on average people didn't have the level of maturity to really appreciate their actions. And there's something very interesting in this because I mean, even if we break down the things that people do wrong to us, usually it's not really that that person's evil. Usually it's not that that person's irredeemable. Most of the time, it's somebody did something to that person to close them off, to make them more callous to the world, and they're just kind of taking that out on you, and all sorts of interesting implications with that idea. But yeah, we'll get started with this video, and we will go to. I have a few other videos pulled up. I'm not sure if we're gonna make it to them, but I have just a quick video on Plato's allegory, Plato's cave allegory. Um, a video I saw Robert Greene post. I know what he's gonna say here, but I think it's gonna be an interesting point. And then C.S. Lewis on talking about Charles Williams, who is the author of the book that I'm currently reading right now. So yeah, interesting stream for you guys, and yeah, it feels good to be back. I feel like I haven't streamed in a little bit. I want to say it's been like around a week, but I don't know. It's definitely like I don't want to stream and not have fun. I don't want to stream and not enjoy it because I feel like if I'm not enjoying it, then you guys aren't going to enjoy it. Whereas, um, if I'm having fun, then it makes it more approachable because we don't do super super entertaining stuff. I guess we can make it entertaining, but I try to do a mix of education with entertainment. I try to make it fun. I try to make it simple. I try to bring down ideas to a bare minimum level so that even if you just listen to it and never approach these ideas again, you still have this lesson and you're still equipped with this for your everyday life. And that's kind of what I hope to do. Maybe I don't do a good job of it, but we'll
Has
see.
long been a topic of interest in
Hold on, I have to my audio's okay,
philosophy.
that should work now.
However, the 18th and 19th centuries were a time when an increased emphasis was placed on understanding the
So Gustave Le Bon, I hate this word so much. He's a polymath, which just it's a fancy way of saying that it's a very pretentious way of saying that you're good in different subjects. Whenever somebody calls himself a polymath, just disregard everything else they say. Maybe if it's attributed to them, then maybe it's a. I just every time I see that word, I'm just like, just call them a thinker, just call them a creative, just call them something. It's like when Khalil Gibran, people try to call him a philosopher. He's like, I'm not a philosopher, and it's just. You know what I mean? It's just one of those titles where it's like I don't want that. I don't want that prestige to it. I just want to be a human being. I don't want to be known as something. It's like it's when something similar happens to George Carlin. People try to call George Carlin a philosopher, but I think calling Carlin a philosopher kind of like denigrates what he does because his insights pierce into something that's so much deeper than philosophy could ever hope to understand. It's really understanding the crowd. It's really understanding the collective. It's understanding where people are going and where they're missing the point and making fun of that and making light of it. But
the psychology of crowds. For example, the 18th century philosopher Rousseau proclaimed that we have a very imperfect knowledge of the human heart if we do
I'm gonna have to speed this guy's voice up. I'm sorry. I like this guy's channel, but I don't think I've ever listened to him at normal speed.
not also examine it in crowds. Gustave Le Bon, a French social psychologist,
So Gustave Le Bon, I found out about Gustave Le Bon because I started reading this book by Edward Bernays, Propaganda. Um, I, Oddly enough, I did not think I was gonna be able to find this book so easily, but I found it in Barnes and Noble, and I was shocked that it offered a book like this because basically this is a playbook for manipulating minds, and one of the people that Edward Bernays cites is Gustave Le Bon, and he said that was one of his main influences for um, writing this book. And Edward Bernays is significant because he was Sigmund Freud's nephew, and he essentially created the entire idea of public relations. Like before Bernays was around, like people didn't like corporations, people didn't see rich people as good people, but he basically tricked them through philanthropy and through building up communities and building parks and stuff like that. He created an entire industry, like a industry of propaganda, of control. And I mean, the book even admits that he like started a revolution in Nicaragua. That's not just me saying like conspiracy theories. Like he literally is responsible for overthrowing a government, and it's like he's not a good guy. But really, his main point in this is that again, I don't agree with this, but people are too stupid to make their own decisions, and we must guide them to the right decision through our propaganda. That people are subtly influenced in all sorts of ways, and we must take control of that so that it's productive for democracy. And I think it's one of the most elitist, sickening kind of mindsets and very utilitarian, very gross. I think everyone should make decisions for their own lives, and I don't think you should impart your wisdom on other people, but that's just who am I to speak? But interesting enough, Bernays is like clearly like Bernays, he's kind of taking Gustave Le Bon's writing and he's using it as a ends to a means. But I think Gustave Le Bon was kind of just trying to observe psychology. Like maybe he did have an ulterior motive, but while I'm reading this book, he's kind of just bringing the facts to the forefront. He's not really saying if they're good or bad. He's you know he says that crowds are extremely emotional and this could be really good or really bad. He often gives both sides and he often gives how somebody could take this information and use it to their benefit or somebody could understand this and do something productive. Like you know what I mean? It's very tricky, but all I'm trying to say is that Gustave Le Bon, he seems to me like more of an observer than an active like malevolent force such as Edward Bernays. But
is often seen as the father of the study of crowd psychology. Le Bon believed an understanding of crowd psychology was essential for a proper understanding of both history and the nature of man. As he wrote in his classic and highly influential work, The Crowd, a study of the
this is a it's a really so this is just like because I'm guessing it's public domain because of obviously this isn't like an official like cover. But it's only about 100 pages, but it's extremely dense. It's one of those books that you're gonna like every page kind of says something really fascinating on it. I'll as we go through talk about it, but it's just it's a very dense book. Like I'm a pretty fast reader, and it took me a few days to read. And normally a 100-page book is one day for me. What's up, Simon? How's everything?
popular mind. It is crowds rather than isolated individuals that may be induced to run the risk of death to secure the triumph of a creed or an idea, that may be fired with enthusiasm for glory and honor. Such heroism is without doubt somewhat unconscious, but it is of such heroism that history is made.
Okay, so what he's saying here is that will you willingly go into a fire and save somebody if it's just you? versus if there's a whole crowd around and you're spurred on by the other people doing so. Why do people do brave things? Why do people, do things that otherwise in different circumstances they wouldn't even think to do? Like, how are people all of a sudden brave soldiers in war where a few weeks ago they were just timid everyday civilians? There's something about being in a crowd, and the greatest example of this is watch a football game alone on TV and go watch a football game in a stadium. And when somebody scores, you feel the whole energy of the crowd when you're there. When somebody scores, and it might be exciting, and maybe if they show the crowd, maybe you feel a little bit of that. But the intensity of being in a crowd and celebrating with other people it's something you can just feel, and it's something that you could just sense if you're very perceptive to it. And that's really what Gustave Le Bon's saying, is that there's some sort of synchronization with people. There's some sort of collective sort of I don't know if it's like collective unconscious or some sort of collective identity that crowds hold. And he defines a crowd. I don't know if he's going to talk about it, but essentially a crowd is a group of people that are gathered for the same reason. That's his definition of a crowd.
In this video, we will provide a summary of Le Bon's classic work. In particular, we will investigate his insights into the nature of crowds, look at the role
Also, I don't know if he's going to talk about it, but a lot of people say that the Hitler read this book and was inspired by it. I don't think he did personally. I think it was the people pulling the strings behind him, but it's a whole different story. But again, I don't think these ideas are like necessarily like evil per se. It's just I don't think information's bad or good. I think it's how you apply it. So it's like a lot of psychology you can read and become very wicked and, take control of people's emotions, or you could just use it for your own benefit, or you could just use it to help yourself. Like for me, what reading this book really benefited me with was understanding when I'm in a crowd, understanding when I'm just mindlessly going with what everyone else is doing, and why it's so tempting to fall victim to this, why it's so tempting to lose my individuality to be part of something larger. And I think this book really kind of convinced me to never take part in anything ever again.
ideas play an influence in crowds, examine the religious sentiment of crowds, and discuss the psychological and emotional benefits one derives from joining a crowd. What is a crowd? Le Bon defined a crowd as a group of individuals united by a common idea, belief, or ideology.
Just again, it's just think of, you're with people for a certain reason. It doesn't even have to be like a planned reason. It could be like the train is late, so now everyone is waiting for the train together. Those people are all united into some sort of common goal or some sort of common thing that they all want to do. It's I think that distinction is very important because when we talk about crowds, we also have to include stuff like that, I think.
The idea which unites a crowd is not chosen by a process of clear reasoning and examination of evidence. Instead, as we will discuss in more detail later, crowds accept beliefs and ideas superficially and utilize them as fuel for revolutionary action.
So crowds like simple ideas. Um, think of have you ever if you ever go to a protest or if you ever see like chants that a high school will make at a game, like they're never complex ideas. They're never really deep and esoteric concepts. They're always just mantras. They're always just repeated phrases that seemingly hold more power than they really should. And what a really good example of this is like think of like the common words that you can say to somebody that's of a different persuasion, that's of a different ideology, that will instantly trigger them. I don't even want to like mention them because there's just a billion examples of things you could say to the wrong person that's instantly going to put them in some sort of way, and they're instantly going to disregard whatever you say. And that's a crowd psychology as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be physically present. If you're still part of a certain group, if you're part of a certain religion or part of a certain political party, like you're still in that group even if people aren't around. And he's obviously going to say it, but why do we join crowds? Why do we become part of something? It's because we're not confident enough in our own capabilities. We're not confident that we can survive without the safety in numbers. And it's a biological function. It makes a whole lot of sense. Like back in the day, when there's giant lions roaming around in whatever country we were in, do you want to get attacked by a lion when it's just you and the lion, or do you want to get attacked by a lion when it's you and 100 other people? I, I don't know about you, but I want to go with 100 people. But I think crowds are somewhat of a necessary evil, and I think you do need some sort of community. I think you do need some sort of collective ideals, but it's a double-edged sword because crowds are capable of some of the heights of humanity, like being moved by a singer, like a singer sings a great song, and the sheer mass of people there, like just build the intensity of it and build the experience. Or think of the bloody revolutions, that just all the mindless and senseless violence that occurred because crowd was collected over a certain sort of ideology. It's just, it's good and bad. And I think that's really what we need to start understanding, and we really need to start understanding that, you know, crowds make people do things they otherwise wouldn't do. When you're part of a collective, you're not thinking. You're giving your thoughts to something else.
When an individual becomes part of a crowd, according to Laban, he undergoes a profound psychological transformation. That is, he ceases to operate as an individual. He is no longer himself, but has become an automaton who has ceased to be guided by his will.
And really what he's saying is that you give up part of yourself to be part of something else. So like think of what we gave up to fit in. Think of your dreams, think of your aspirations, think of how many times you had to go to the bathroom and you raised your hand in class and your teacher said you can't go to the bathroom, so you just sat there and listened to her. Like that's essentially the little things, like the little deals with the devil we make every single day. It's we're doing this for the sake of comfort. We're doing this for the sake of not being ostracized. I forgot to mention this is Academy of Ideas. I really like this channel, by the way.
With such a psychological transformation, an individual no longer lives for himself, but instead becomes a pawn who sacrifices his own personal ends and goals in favor of those of the crowd.
Okay, so when you're part of something, you put that thing before yourself. And that's a very dangerous game to play because you don't necessarily always know what you're doing it for. Like think of how many people died in the Crusades, and maybe some of the I guess you could make the argument that some of the Crusades were defensive war. I don't care about history enough, but like there were certainly Crusades where it was just purely for profit. I think the Crusades were a bad example. Think of like the modern wars, they're purely for profit. So it's like, are you really living and dying for something worthwhile? Are you living and dying for somebody to make money? You're dying in a trench so that some oligarch, some billionaire can make more profit than they did last year. It's just
In a crowd, every sentiment and act is contagious, and contagious to such a degree that an individual readily sacrifices his personal interest to the collective interest.
so if the crowd does good, you do good. And because it's a collective energy, because it's all of these people synchronizing their happiness together, that happiness is built to a level that is difficult to experience in your own life. And that's why it's nice to be part of a crowd as well, because you know it's really easy to celebrate when other people are there. Like think of your individual accomplishments that nobody else saw but you, and maybe you were proud about it for a moment, but think of like graduation. Like graduation is really a ritual or a ceremony, but most of you graduating, like you've graduated weeks before that moment, but it's because everyone's so excited that it makes it such a significant sort of event in your life.
As was mentioned earlier, Lebon maintained that a crowd forms when an influential idea unites a number of individuals and propels them to act towards a common goal. These influential ideas, however, are never created by members of the crowd. Instead, they are brought into the world by the minds of great individuals.
This isn't okay. So this isn't always the case. Um, this is how Gustave Le Bon said great leaders can influence a crowd. But this isn't not necessarily exactly what Gustave Le Bon says. Gustave Le Bon says crowds are sometimes formed just out of the blue. Like think of any movement, really, most movements are just a response to an opposite force. I mean, if you didn't know this, Isaac Newton was an alchemist, and a lot of his stuff is just hermetic principles. But think of it, for every force there's an opposite but equal force that reacts. So I said that's so wrong. For every action there's an opposite but equal reaction. So you get moved this way, something moves you back to the middle. And that's sort of how you should see collective movements. That's how you should sort of see collective ideologies. I don't even see like politicians as anything but just an embodiment of a set of ideals, an embodiment of a certain archetype that people are thinking is going to save them. There's thinking is going to reverse the ill effects of the last policy or the last sort of political movement. But again, this is a crowd that's directed by a charismatic ruler. So most of the book, Gustave Le Bon, he's obviously a Frenchman. He talks about Napoleon and how Napoleon was such a charismatic leader and how everything he did kind of was able to directly impact all sorts of people. And he also tells the story of Napoleon when he came back from Elba, right? This- Hold on, I have to block some keep calling me. You guys have to remind me to unblock this guy because I promise you he won't stop calling me. All right. So anyway, Napoleon was on Elba and he snuck his way back to France and there was supposed to be this really big battle where Napoleon was going to try to reclaim his army, but he said, "If anyone wants to kill your emperor, please do." And everyone threw down their swords, and he immediately retook France, which is that's one of the coolest stories you'll ever hear ever. Um, but yeah, that's Gustave Le Bon obviously loved Napoleon. Sorry to get
Since those
sidetracked
who
for so
compose a
long.
crowd are by their very nature mediocre, they are incapable of understanding these ideas in their
Okay, so those who compose a crowd are mediocre. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that the crowd is composed of, you know, the rabble rousers. Couldn't think of a good word. I don't know if anyone knows what that means. Um, it's not that the crowd is composed of like idiots or fools or anything like that. It's just that when you're in a crowd, you can only embody the collective. You can only embody the traits that everybody possesses. And the average person doesn't possess a level of maturity that is beyond uh, some sort of development. Think of the average person and put those people together and think of the kind of decisions they make. And this is in any group. This is regardless of any class, of any religion, of any education, of any sort of um, distinguishedness and all sorts of whatever group that you could think of, it doesn't matter. Gustave Le Bon spends a considerable amount of time saying that like juries of the most educated people will often make just as bad decisions as the most lowly educated people. And like there's this really weird idea that I feel like a lot of people are talking about right now is like, I mean, it kind of makes sense like on its face, but it doesn't make sense in practicality. But a lot of people are like, well, we should make you have to have a some sort of investment in the country to make a vote, and you shouldn't be on welfare and all sorts of stuff. Like maybe that's a good idea in sentiment, and maybe in theory it seems all right, but it's just regardless of what you're going to get, the crowd and the collective is always going to fall victim to the whims of a charismatic leader. They're always going to not have reason. Think of there's this very famous story of JFK and Richard Nixon debating for the presidential debates. And anybody that listened to the radio thought Nixon won, but anybody that watched TV thought that JFK won. And it's because JFK was so much better looking than Nixon and he had such charisma and you could see the body language and it just goes to show that even the most reasonable people can be tricked by the simple aspects of a charismatic leader. And it's just that's something you're never going to get away from regardless of the group, regardless of what the group is comprised of. And like just literally just think about this for like 5, 10 minutes and it'll just make sense.
original form. Therefore, in order for an idea to unite and influence a crowd, it must first be thoroughly simplified. Ideas being only accessible to crowds after having assumed a very simple shape must often undergo the most thoroughgoing transformations to become popular. It is especially when we are dealing with somewhat lofty philosophical or scientific ideas that we see how far reaching are the modifications.
Think of like how much, like it seems like a lot of people have like an idea of who Nietzsche was, but very few people have actually read him and really understand exactly what he's getting at, myself included. He's such an interesting character, but it's that sort of idea of things. It's that when the average everyday person starts talking about something and it's so watered down their understanding of the concept and the idea of things. It's like think of any of like the really dumb slogans like tax the rich. It's like that's not really how it works. Rich people don't have income, that's why they're rich. So if you tax the rich, it just means tax the middle class. And I hate to break it to you, but the middle class is still the poor, but just less poor.
They
Um,
require in order to lower
anyway,
them to the level of the intelligence of crowds. However great or true an idea may have been to begin with, it is deprived of almost all that which constituted its elevation and its greatness by the mere fact that it has come within the intellectual range of crowds and exerts
again, think of the slogans and the things that people repeat and how dumb those ideas really are in practicality. There's probably some sort of basis and there's probably is some sort of explanation for them, but the general understanding of these slogans and concepts are so far from the thing. And it's like the easiest example of this is like think of all those street interviews where they like they do so much numbers just because it like makes fun of people and you're like, well, this whole ideology is an idiot because this random person can't explain exactly what they believe. And it's like it's probably about 95% of people that can't explain why they believe a certain thing. Like you're not really proving anything. Like I don't think very many people are introspective in the day and age where your attention is being commodified and people are making money off your attention and we're all falling victim to it.
an influence upon them. For example, a great philosopher could extol the nature of liberty in an 800-page masterpiece. However, the crowd, incapable of comprehending such thoughts, would require the concept of liberty to be thoroughly simplified in order for it to stimulate revolutionary action.
And this was a really interesting idea because really what I got from this is Gustave Le Bon was saying that it takes like a few generations for these ideas that are being talked about to be implemented. And you really see that because the easiest example of this is Aldous Huxley and George Orwell. They're known as these great predictors of how dystopian the world will be, but they were in the elite colleges where the people were talking about what they wanted to do. Like I'm sure these people knew all about Cecil Rhodes and the weird stuff that guy was up to, or well, he stole Jabir's name, but and worked for the Rothschilds. That's not important.
Le Bon proposed that this is where leaders come in, for it is the leader of a crowd who communicates simplified ideas to the crowd, and in doing so unites it together and stimulates it to act. The majority of men, especially among the masses, do not possess clear and reasoned ideas on any subject whatever outside their own specialty. The leader serves them as guide.
And this seems to be like almost like the most efficient way of controlling people is by compartmentalizing them. Once you get people to look at different things, once you get people to look outside their own bubble, then they can start to piece together the bigger picture and they're much harder to fool. Don't get me wrong, I still get fooled all the time, but it's certainly a lot less when I was just, you know, 17 or 18 and just an idiot. Like, I mean, I'm still an idiot to be fair, but it's it's when we say, well, I can't do this because of this. I don't like math, so I'm not going to look into the math of these stuff. I don't like this, so I don't want to read it. It's like I was thinking this the other day. It's like when you can't even read what you're supposed to hate, isn't that a sign that you should probably read it? You know what I mean? Like think of how many people go like, "Well, you're reading this book and that person's bad, so you must be bad." It's like there's all different kinds of reasons to read. There's all different kinds of reasons to study things. You know, maybe you're studying it so that you get a deeper understanding of this person and understand where their motivations come from, or maybe you're just trying to, you know, learn more about your opposition. Like it's just like it's so stupid.
Guide. In the modern day, one can see how invigorated and rejuvenated crowds become when they hear a leader pronounce that a cause is being fought in the name of freedom, peace, or prosperity. Once these words are proclaimed,
The funniest thing to me is that, like, Orwell in 1984 said, war is freedom. And, like, that slogan is literally used in, like, pretty much all propaganda. It's like, we're freedom fighters. Oh, yeah, you are. Really? Yeah.
the members of the crowd nod their head in blind
Maybe you
obedience
are, but
to whatever else
it's.
follows from the leader's mouth, completely ignorant as to the corrupt purposes that may be the true guide for the leader's actions. As Le Bon wrote, how numerous are the crowds that have heroically faced death for beliefs, ideas, and phrases that they scarcely understood.
And that's the craziest thing to think about is that think of like all the wars in Europe that were fought because somebody's cousin like was the rightful heir. And it's like people didn't even understand what they were fighting for, but they just did it because they were supposed to. It's just it's so stupid to think that like most war just comes down to like rich people wanting to get richer and tricking your subservience, tricking your peasants to fight and die in your name. It's so I don't know. The more I think about it, the more I'm just like, what? How does this work? But that's also the whole game too, because it's like even the things I'm saying right now, you show this to the wrong person, the stuff I'm saying, and they're like, well, he just doesn't get this. He doesn't get the essence of how important it is to push this certain idea, and the world's gonna end without this. It's like even me saying to not be part of a crowd is a confrontational idea. It shouldn't be. You know, you should always evaluate what you believe. You should always evaluate the things that you're doing. Whenever you blindly follow something, you're blindly following someone else's destiny, not your own. You know, if you support a political party, if you support a certain religion, and you can't even criticize your own party or your religion, then that's a sign that you're being made a fool of.
Referring to the ideas which leaders manipulate in order to govern and control crowds, Le Bon wrote, by many they are considered as natural forces, as supernatural powers. They evoke grandiose and vague images in men's minds. But this very vagueness that wraps them in obscurity augments their mysterious power. They are the mysterious divinities hidden behind the tabernacle, which the devout only approach in fear and trembling. Approaching these simplified and therefore gravely misunderstood ideas as mysterious divinities, a crowd always forms a religious relationship to the ideas which motivate them to action. This being
Think of like I'm sure if you're an American, you've seen like the people who their cars are like filled with the stickers that say like freedom, I love this, I love that. It's like I don't know. I'm such an outsider to all these sorts of ideas that it just makes me laugh. Like maybe there is something good behind it. Maybe there is like a certain nobleness to it, and maybe it's not maybe I'm just like being a pessimist, and maybe I'm just being a critic for no reason. But it's funny to me to see these sorts of things and then juxtapose that with the actual entity that they're talking about. Like I don't know. It's something I hear recently is like I hear people say like patriot as like something that's like the highest ideal you could have. And I don't necessarily think that's you know what I mean? It's like, you could call yourself a patriot, but Edward Snowden is still in Russia. So it's like, most people don't even know who that is. Like most people my age, I guarantee if you say Snowden, they don't know. And that's the scariest thing is that the people that really risk their lives to protect the American people are in jail. Same thing with Assange. Same thing with I mean Kiriaki went to jail too, which is like it's ridiculous. But anyway,
the case even when the
real 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 truth always has its price. You know, these people are using their freedom of speech, but
ideas have no explicit religious component. A person is not religious solely when he worships a divinity, but when he puts all the resources of his mind, the complete submission of his will, and the whole souled ardor of fanaticism at the service of a cause or an individual who becomes the goal and guide of his thoughts and actions. Along this line of reasoning, Le Bon continued, were it possible to induce the masses to adopt atheism, disbelief would exhibit all the intolerant ardor of a religious sentiment, and in its exterior forms would soon become a cult.
go on Reddit atheist. I can't remember who said this. I think it was either Albert Pike or Manly P. Hall, and they said something along the lines of uh, the absence of God will just replace that idea with something else. So like the most atheistic people, they'll either their religion will become atheism or scientism or materialism, or it'll become like veganism or activism or some sort of other belief. Even people that are religious, they'll also like incorporate other aspects into the religion, like the idea that the United States is a Christian nation. That's just it's very contradictory to be a Christian nation. You know what I mean? It doesn't really it doesn't really equate. It doesn't really make sense. It's just there shouldn't be, you know, you shouldn't have a it's like the Pope kind of being a political position. It's like you really shouldn't have any political power if you're the Pope. You know, you're Christ's you know, I forget the word, but you're essentially the one that contacts Christ, the closest person to Christ in the world, and you're influencing it's just it's very stupid.
While crowds are capable of acts which achieve both good and evil, Le Bon believed that more often than not, crowds commit barbarous and immoral actions. Why do crowds so often act in an immoral manner?
Think of any riot, think of when things get out of hand. The greatest example of this is go to any Eagles game when they're throwing they're throwing snowballs at Santa Claus. What did Santa do to deserve that? My dad was actually, I don't know if my dad was at the game, but apparently he said Santa was like drunk and being an idiot, so that's why people started pelting him with snowballs. I don't know if that's necessarily justified, but at least it's not as bad as it sounds. Or like the Philly parades when the Eagles win and like people are tearing down like street signs and stuff and climbing telephone poles. Like, what is that? And really what that is that your rationality doesn't exist anymore. Because you're part of a crowd, you're not capable of deeper thought. And because you're part of the crowd, you have some sort of protection that will allow you to act in ways that you otherwise wouldn't have the gall to, aside from the fact that you're protected by this entity. So it kind of brings out your most base natures if the crowd is moved to such lengths. And that's how you can like see stuff like the Nuremberg trials where people say they were just following orders. It's like they were, but they could also always say no, and they went along with stuff and yeah, it's just reprehensible. But at the same time, it's like that's their justification is that they acted in a way that they otherwise wouldn't, which to some degree is true, but it doesn't absolve them of their evil. But it's just how crowds work. And that's why this is so important to understand because you don't want to attach yourself to things without thinking about them. I don't think it's bad to be part of a movement, but I think it's bad to be part of a movement where you can't question it, where you can't think for yourself, where you can't dissent from the crowd. That's when it becomes something of an issue. And it's very difficult to be involved in things without becoming attached to things. And that's really the important aspect of this is that I want you to be an individual, not a collective. The closer you are to your individualities, the closer you are to yourself, and the easier life will be. The closer you are to a crowd, you might have the security, you might have the comfort, but don't sacrifice your soul for the sake of comfort. As Emerson said, the greatest thing in a world full of conformity, being yourself is the greatest achievement. More or less the quote.
Le Bon put forth the following explanation. Our savage, destructive instincts are the inheritance left dormant in all of us from the primitive ages. In the life of the isolated individual, it would be dangerous for him to gratify these instincts, while his absorption in an irresponsible crowd, in which in consequence he is assured of impunity, gives him entire liberty to follow them.
Okay, so basically what I just said, but in a way easier way to understand. I feel like I went a really roundabout way of explaining that. But yeah, exactly what I said in just much better fashion.
The 20th
The things that people do in crowds, it might exist in them, but they never in their right minds would do such a thing. But when there's no fear of consequences, and when you see other people doing it, then you just do it as well. It's like peer pressure. You know, you do something stupid because you see other people do it. And like, what is that aside from trying to fit in?
century psychologist Carl Jung reiterated this idea. If
I I don't know. I don't know if I've ever found. I'm sure Jung talks about Gustav Le Bon, but I feel like they would agree on a lot of what Laban talks about because a lot of what Laban talks about kind of is somewhat indicative of a collective unconscious, which is one of Jung's main ideas and one of Jung's really the most important. I don't know. I feel like that's probably the biggest difference between Jung and Freud is that maybe Freud believed in it. Maybe I don't know Freud well enough, but I think Jung took it in a sort of mystical lens.
If people crowd together and form a mob, then the dynamisms of the collective man are let loose, beasts or demons that lie dormant in every person until he is part of a mob. Man in the mass sinks unconsciously to an inferior moral and intellectual level, to that level which is always there, below the threshold of consciousness, ready to break forth as soon as it is activated by the formation of a mass. Nonetheless, Le Bon believed he understood what motivated individuals to join a crowd. When an individual lives his life as an individual, that is, when he is forced to take responsibility for his life, he is apt to feel a crushing burden and sense of impotence he can't seem to shake. In joining a crowd or a mass movement,
It's much easier to join a crowd and find a purpose than it is to go your own way and find a purpose. Think of it that way. You know, think of like the traditional career path. You go to college, you get a job, and that's the safe option. But is it really a safe option? Or, what if you went to trade school? What if you did your own thing? What if you started your own business? Like, you'd probably find more freedom in that, and you'd probably find more fun in that, and more fulfillment in that, and more individuality in that. But that requires risk. Really, college is just as much risk because you're going to debt to learn things that might not even get you a job, especially with the genesis of AI. And your 401k is tied up until a certain age. You can't really use it. If you use it, you get massive tax penalties. So it's really as safe as we think it is. In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. And it's just, you know, I think we oftentimes don't think about these
the individual is temporarily
realities.
relieved of this responsibility and sense of impotence, and comes to feel that he is capable of shaking the foundations of the earth. In crowds, the foolish, ignorant, and envious persons are freed from the sense of their insignificance and powerlessness, and are possessed instead by the notion of brutal and temporary but immense strength. Le Bon thought that we are all in a sense part of a crowd, as we are all motivated by ideas and ideologies which are socialized into us and via communal action unite us with others in our culture.
Again, I don't think you're ever going to get away from this unless you go into a monastery, but even then, you're part of a group there too. So it's, unless you're an absolute hermit, I think you're going to in some way be part of a crowd. It's just not falling victim to it. It's not following things blindly. It's not subscribing to things that you don't otherwise agree to.
Many of our actions, in other words, are motivated by ideas, beliefs, and ideologies which we do not understand. Le Bon thought it was impossible to fully extricate oneself from all these implicit ideas, yet he did maintain that partial freedom and independence can be attained by bringing to the light of reason the ideas, values, and beliefs which guide our actions. For as Le Bon wisely proclaimed, the tyranny exercised unconsciously on men's minds is the only real tyranny, because it cannot be fought against.
The tyranny exercised unconsciously on men's minds is the only real tyranny because it cannot be fought against. It's very interesting because there's always this implicit layer of propaganda. Even news that's not trying to be propaganda is propaganda. Like even if we just take the best of intentions, that person takes that story and they spin it with their own biases in some way. Even if they're trying to be completely honest and completely fair, they're still going to view it through a certain lens. So there always is some propaganda. Even in this, I'm trying to win you over to my perspective. You know what I mean? I'm trying to capture your attention. I'm in some way trying to influence you. I'm trying to use comedy examples. I'm trying to move you in some sort of direction. So like it's not necessarily wrong to be moved. It's not necessarily wrong to be influenced. It's just you must be aware of these influences. You must understand where they're coming from. You must understand their pitfalls and their shortcomings and be ever vigilant. I think we have to return to Gurdjieff's ideas of self-observation and you know self-knowing because without these ideas we don't really have a way to affect these things. Know where your mind's going to, know where you're being influenced. Watch your own thoughts, watch what they go to. Understand how you're being emotionally manipulated when you watch a certain video. How many times have you been on Instagram or TikTok or Twitter and you see something and it instantly enrages you and then You just realize that the algorithm showed you this just to piss you off, just to take your attention for a handful of seconds, and that you could use that time and energy and attention to do something productive in your life. I think it's just understanding that and understanding that we're all in some way being influenced. We're all in some way being manipulated and hypnotized to believe a certain thing. It's just understand that message and understand where it's coming from because it's something that happens. And if you're aware of it and you control it, then you can do it for good instead of for bad, instead of being aimlessly guided. You don't want to be like Forrest Gump, the feather blowing in the wind. You want to be conscious and aware of what you're doing so that you're not influenced to do something that you don't want to do. You don't fall victim to an ideology that takes away your sovereignty. That's really what I'm trying to tell you here. All right, we'll get to these other videos. Hopefully this is a good video. I think this is just an audio from C.S. Lewis talking about Charles Williams. So hopefully this doesn't get copyrighted. I know C.S. Lewis is apparently his estate is very litigious with this stuff. So I'll just cut it out if it's not.
I've sometimes wondered whether certain criticisms on the
No way this is his voice. This is sped up.
stories of
Oh, I forget he's English. 'Cause I love C.S. Lewis. Like his space trilogy is like that's gonna be the next thing. I'm gonna read the second book of his space trilogy. That's gonna be the next thing I read. And like the more I read of him, the more interesting I find him.
Charles Williams aren't equally wide of the mark. The complaint often made against them is that they mix what some people call the realistic and the fantastic. I'd rather fall back on an older critical terminology and say that they mix the probable and the marvelous.
So he's talking about Charles Williams, who was one of his friends. C.S. Lewis read The Place of the Lion and then immediately contacted Charles Williams and invited him to be part of him and Tolkien's literary group.
We meet in them, on the one hand, very ordinary modern people who talk the slang of our own day and live in the suburbs. On the other hand, we also meet the supernatural, ghosts, magicians, and archetypal beasts.
I don't think I'm ever going to be able to read C.S. Lewis in the same way, knowing this is his voice. Like I don't know what I was picturing because like I never like because he writes in English, so I'm just assuming he sounds like me. But I always forget he's from England. They have accents.
The first thing to grasp is that this is not a mixture of two literary kinds. That's what some readers suspect and resent. They acknowledge, on the one hand, straight fiction, the classical novel, as we know it from Fielding to Galsworthy. They acknowledge, on the other, the pure fantasy, which creates a world of its own.
So really quick, the book I'm reading right now, it's called The Place of the Lion. I just mentioned it, but basically it's a story where this sorcerer opens a portal to kind of the spirit world, we'll say. I think is the easiest way to define it, and all sorts of monsters and entities are wreaking havoc in this town, and I'm not done with it, so I don't know how it ends, but how I'm assuming it ends, the guy confronts the archetypes, the guy confronts the dragon, and he keeps mentioning a dragon, so I'm assuming there's a dragon. Um, but he confronts these archetypes and he overcomes them. And it's just an allegory for the marriage of Christian Rosenkreuz, because this guy was a Rosicrucian, but it's it's so well done, and it really reminds me of like the Canterbury Tales mixed with the Space Trilogy, if that makes sense.
Cut off in a kind of ring fence from reality. Books like The Wind in the Willows, or Vathek, or The Princess of Babylon. And they complain that Williams is asking them to skip to and fro from the one to the other in the same work. But Williams is really writing a third kind of book which belongs to neither class and has a different value from either.
I know what he's trying to say, but I don't know if I could explain it.
He is writing that sort of book in which we begin by saying, Let us suppose that this everyday world were at some one point invaded by the marvelous.
Okay, so it's some way like Ulysses, where Ulysses tries to find the heights of fiction through the ordinary lives of Dubliners. And what Charles Williams does is he tries to show you the underpinning of values that exist in society through these allegories. So like this guy's confronting a lion. What is that but man overcoming the forces of nature? Very easy symbolism, but it's just he does it in a very imaginative way, and it's just really interesting. But I figured I'd share that with you guys. So, this is the Robert Greene video I said we're gonna go through, and I think this is interesting because I hate AI. Okay. If AI was used by the right people, I think it could be interesting. But I think there's too many creeps and weirdos that exist in Silicon Valley where yeah, it's going to be used for the worst possible things ever. It's going to make everything worse. But the silver lining here is that there's going to be an AI bubble and it will reset and it will become better. But right now I think people are just like attaching AI to everything and it's just like, oh, AI, let's invest in this. Like angel investors will just see that shit and they'll just be like, yeah, we got to invest in this. This is really exciting. And, one of these things is going to go up 30,000%. So we can make all of our money back that we throw around. And that's why I feel like the whole like idea of AI is kind of watered down. But anyway, we'll get into it.
Creative whose mind is weird can't be reproduced by AI. So I think in the future, it really won't change much. In the future of AI, what will writers be like? We tend to freak out about these things.
I think AI is going to level the playing field for the best of the best. If you have AI, you don't need to pay an editor. Well, you should still look over it, but it can do a lot of the formatting for you. If you have AI, you don't need somebody to design the cover if you really spend enough time doing it. Like the thumbnail for today's stream, I just put that into Grok. I was like, do a I was actually gonna play around with it. I was like, can you make a picture that summarizes Gustave Le Bon's The Crowd? And it did that instantly. I'm like, oh, I like this. It's pretty good. This is kind of exactly what I was thinking. Like I was gonna put crowd with like a kind of like a puppeteer above them, but I was like, no, this is actually better than what I thought. So like, if you really play around with images and if you really play around with what you want to create, you can create something interesting. Like where's my book? Not me losing my own book. Like this was I had AI make this for me. And I obviously it's AI. I mean, I could have done this myself. But like I feel like this is a decent representation of what I was trying to encapsulate with this book. And I'm not somebody that really cares too much about covers as long as it's simple and as long as it kind of carries the weight of the text that I'm okay with it. But as AI gets better, these things are going to get better. So I think in a certain way it's going to level the playing field and it's going to make it uh easier and easier to be an author, easier and easier to publish yourself. Like I self-published all my stuff on Amazon and it really just took me like 2 days because you'd send it to them and they just approve it if it's as long as you don't write anything crazy. Like I mean maybe I write crazy stuff, but I don't write stuff that's like I guess you could write illegal stuff like say people's addresses or something. I don't know what would be considered illegal to write and to publish, but yeah.
In the moment about
Probably just something that goes against Amazon's terms of service. But that's what I did and it worked out and it was cool.
like things like AI or the internet when it happened, or television when it happened, or radio when it happened. But the truth is, writing a book is writing a book, and it's a process, and it's difficult, and it requires a certain kind of personality, a certain kind of patience, the ability to be alone a lot, spend a lot of time.
See, and the other thing is you can already tell AI is writing a lot of the scripts for Hollywood, and Hollywood's never been worse because there's no imagination in it. That's the thing AI really can't capture. Maybe there'll be a day and age where it can, but I think the human mind is capable of pulling together two seemingly unrelated ideas where there's always going to be a roboticness to AI. There's always going to be some sort of coldness and mechanicalness that is not going to be able to capture the same weight as um human being can. And the easiest example of this is like a lot of people. So this is something that like happens in like when you make beats. Don't ask me how I know this. I don't know how I know this, but if you do a recording on a piano, those notes aren't going to be perfect. There's going to be something a little off. Whereas if you have the computer make the notes are perfect. So it's a different sound. And I think it's the imperfectness of human beings that really carry the sentiments in which inspire us all. If a work was absolutely perfect and everything was so amazing, then there wouldn't be people that would argue this work sucks. But if because there's people that argue that this work sucks, then you have discussions, and then these discussions build the prestige of this work and all sorts of there's somewhat necessity to tear things down, and you can't tear things down if it's perfect.
I'm alone and to organize a lot of material. Now, AI might be able to help writers. You can ask certain questions, certain prompts, and
AI is really good. Like what I use AI mostly for is if I'm asking like where did this person get this idea from? Did this person read this author? Like just stuff that you're not going to be able to get in Wikipedia and something I want answered quick. Obviously you could always go and read biographies, but like if you just have a simple question that you want the answer to, AI is pretty good about finding that stuff out. Sometimes it'll lie to you though. Like I was asking like where did C.S. Lewis get this idea from? And it was like, oh, we don't know. And I'm like, he was connected to someone in some sort of mystery school. And he's like, no, C.S. Lewis was not in the mystery school. And I'm like, I didn't say he had to be in it. I say he got this idea from it. It's like, oh yeah, you're right. And I'm like, like it'll lie to you. You have to like call it out sometimes. But
get answers about how I can organize my book or research questions. It could speed up that process a little bit. But in the end, you as the writer have to be the one actually writing the book. It has to come from you. It has to be original. If you just cut and paste things that come from AI, I know people have sent me things and they sent me, this is what AI says about Robert Greene and the 48 Laws of Power and et cetera. And it reads
I can't imagine what it says about it. It's probably such a bad take.
like it comes from a machine. Quite frankly, I can see it through it. I can see the kind of repetitiveness. I can see the lack of a spirit. It's just spewing back things from the large language model that it has digested millions and millions of texts, and you can see it spewing it back out. An original writer whose mind is creative, whose mind is weird, can't be reproduced by AI. So I think in the future, it really won't change much. People will still be having to struggle through writing a book.
I think it's gonna disrupt like like the people that make like the slot books. I think it'll be more difficult for them because AI can replicate the lower level of literature, but I think it's like all fields. I think like AI is going to replace the lowest levels of stuff. Like most of the low level jobs can now be done by AI. All the data entry stuff can be done by AI. Maybe just have someone look at the stuff, but the higher levels, like are you ever going to trust an AI accountant? Are you ever going to trust an AI attorney? I don't see it happening. Are computers and robots going to get so good that a plumber can't do you know what I mean? That's like I feel like there's this like cringy video that I feel like everyone has seen, but it's like, oh yeah, if you want to make money, become a plumber. It's like, yeah, you can do that, but like there's something right about it. It's just the smugness the guy has.
They'll still have to go through a process. They'll still have to do research. They'll
I don't know. I'm also just a hater.
still have to be alone. They'll still have to organize their
I don't think he's
thoughts.
smug. It's just
And the
I've seen
people
the
who
video too
don't go
much.
through that process and who try and cheat their way and try to use AI to kind of write the book for them, I don't think in the end they'll have very much success. I know people are looking now at like entire works of fiction written by AI. And I suppose they might be interesting, and I'd like to look at them to see that coming from a totally
I'm sure they already have them, and I wonder if any of them are any good. Because like you could even have the problem with AI is AI can't discern what's right and what's wrong. doesn't have its own filter. It can say certain things based off of certain things. It can respond in a certain way based off how you ask the question. But there's certain taboo topics, there's certain things it won't touch, there's certain things that it's afraid to say. And I don't think that it'll ever get over that because of the way corporations run things. Maybe if it's open source, maybe that'll be different,
different
but
angle of how to construct a book. But in the end, I don't think much will change. But I've told this before over and over again, so please understand and don't get me wrong. I am not Nostradamus. I have no knowledge of the future. I don't know what AI will do to books. But if I'm hopeful that people who are writers, who understand the process and the difficulties and the problems involved, will still be going through that process. But I have no idea what
why'd you make a video saying,
the future writer
is this fair? Like you don't know what the future holds, but I truly believe, and this has been my take for a while, is that the thing that AI can't replace is your spirit and your creativity. So master those things. Those are the things that won't be replaced in our generation. Maybe in 100 years, maybe in 1,000 years. I don't know. Maybe one day it gets sentient and it becomes just as creative as Dante or Shakespeare. But till that day, I think you still have the ultimate advantage on AI. So yeah, use it as a tool. Let me see how long I've been going for. Yeah, we're going for about an hour. Um, I'll do one more video. We'll go through this video.
instead of
I don't feel
expanding
like talking about Plato's cave algebra. I've talked about it so much.
your mind to this incredible universe that we live in, that
Okay, so The Sublime is the name of his next book. And I don't know when it's supposed to come out, but he's been talking about it for years at this point. Ever since I've been streaming, that's been like a year or two.
technology can and should do. And maybe in the early days of the internet, it was doing that to some degree, but now it's getting narrower and narrower. But it's not the fault of technology. It's the fault of human nature. It's the fault that we take these tools and then we end up using them and making them more and more banal.
This is like an interesting idea. Like when you hear people talk about how the internet used to be, it seems like it used to be like a much more fun place. Things weren't as serious. And really what you can pinpoint is that when people started making money and companies started getting involved in the internet, everything went downhill because everything then had to be done through the lens of can you say this and can we still sponsor on this video? And once that became a concern, then it kind of completely changed the way that people were doing things. Instead of doing things for fun, it was for profit, and that's the worst way to do things.
The sublime is something that's all around you. And in fact, technology in the world today could be a tool for opening you to the sublime at every single moment. I mean, we have the new telescope that was launched, not the Hubble, but the new one, I forget what it's called. What we're able to see about our cosmos through this telescope, like photographs of a black hole. It's insane. I'm sorry I keep going back to that.
Do you guys want to see the picture he's talking about? This is the picture he's talking about. And obviously it's because the gravity's distorting the image. The gravitational field for a black hole is so strong that it just, you know, the camera, it's not going to work properly because of the forces that are acting upon it. But
Technology could be absolutely incredible for expanding our vision of the universe, for creating images. If I were in charge of the internet, I would make, like recreations of what planet Earth looked like 3 billion years ago, and they probably could find that. I mean, technology could be an absolutely wonderful tool.
It's oftentimes just used for the worst things possible. It really is. When you look at how the internet's used, like it should be something that brings people together. Instead, it's used to divide us and used to control us and used to bring out the worst of humanity.
For opening us to the sublime, right? But unfortunately, it's not like that. And unfortunately, human nature has taken over. And so instead of expanding our minds, which it can do and should do, I have this in the book. I mean, people have created
Think about it this way. You've never had access to more information, but people have never been dumber. Like people don't even know how to do basic things. Like how many videos have you seen of like just people doing things where you're like, where'd you even like I can't think of a good example. That's how dumb I am, but that's just proof of the point that I'm so dumb I can't even think of an example of how dumb people are. I like had the idea but I couldn't state it.
music that appeals
Oh, it's like the where the girl puts the wiper fluid in the oil. It's the oil. Why can't I? Yeah, it's the tanker
to
container in the
spiders.
car.
Spiders have a completely different sort of brain than we do, and they live through vibrations. And they've been able to study the vibrations that appeal to spiders, and they've created music for them that spiders react to. And they've done this for monkeys as well. It's
That's like I bet like how many billions of dollars you spent doing like what are you gonna learn from that? Like it's cool, but like I'm just imagining the budget that was spent on that. Like what what applications are coming from that? Like it's
absolutely fantastic. It's like Leonardo da Vinci could never imagine himself in a million years that such things exist. And yet, look at us. We're posting photographs of what people had for breakfast. We're looking at people's, half naked pictures on vacations. Who the cares about any of this? It's so banal. It's so stupid. It's so boring. So instead of
it is so true. Like most of the stuff people post is just pure slop. Like there are genuinely interesting stuff. Hopefully I'm one of them. I know I'm not, but like the vast majority of the content online is just absolute garbage and absolutely just so boring, so nonsensical, and it's like we literally have access to the greatest works of literature ever. But how many people are using that access? How many people go on Project Gutenberg or go on Amazon to buy the book? Like I think that's really the main issue is that we're not using these tools to our benefit. We're using these tools to distract us and distract us from life instead of use them to conquer life.
expanding your mind to this incredible universe that we live in, that technology can and should do. And maybe in the early days of the internet, it was doing that to some degree, but now it's getting narrower and narrower and narrower and narrower, and our concerns are getting narrower and narrower to how people look, to what they're eating.
Think of like something that I hate to use this guy, but this is something Chomsky talks about in Manufacturing Consent, and recent recent discoveries bring a whole new meaning to that title. I hope no one got what I was trying to say. I'm glad I made that too high level. You got to really think about that one to get the joke. But he said you're allowed to talk about three issues in terms of politics, but once you veer off from those three issues, then you're looked at like you have three heads. And you know, how many people talk about the Federal Reserve? How many people talk about the deficit? I think Thomas Massey is the only person that mentions the deficit in all of government. I've never seen anyone else mention the deficit. Granted, I don't pay attention to that stuff, but he's the only one that I've ever seen mention that. Why don't we have a balanced budget? Why does the Pentagon keep failing all of its audits? Um, Gotta check for a drone out there. It's like there's just basic questions that like everyone should be asking, but instead we're like, well, what bathroom can people use? It's like let that be like the 1,000th issue we talk about. Like let's talk about what's actually important.
to all of the petty values and the things that are making us so angry and outraged. Instead of expanding our consciousness, it's narrowing it day by day by day by day. But it's not the fault of technology. It's the fault of human nature. It's the fault that we take these tools and then we end up using them and making them more and more banal, more and more not for these kind of purposes. As I said, it's up to you to use them in this way. I remember in the early days of the internet how exciting it was. And I'm talking about the early 2000s, where you could connect to people all over the world with similar interests. It wasn't all about making money. It wasn't all about algorithms and programming us. It was about connecting people. If technology was used to
I spent like 20 minutes today trying to get any decent video on my algorithm that I could talk about, and I ended up just having to look it up. And it's like it really is like, you know, a lot of what I watch is educational, but it took me like 20 minutes to find anything interesting. And that's like that should really tell you all you need to know is like the algorithms are broken. The algorithms don't work. The algorithms aren't interesting. You know, they cater to the lowest common denominator. They don't try to make you a better person. They don't try to inspire you with ideas. They just try to you like this idea, so you should go with the most popular person in this thing, or not a person that other people with similar interests are interested in. No, you're gonna get pushed into this very narrow echo chamber and you're gonna be stuck here forever.
connect 8.2 billion people, and I could have access to all the different ways of thinking in Sri Lanka and et cetera. And it was just creating this, and it had nothing to do with marketing and money. We would be living in a paradise. It would be absolutely
Mm,
fantastic.
I don't think there is such thing as paradise. And I don't think people would want that. You know, it's kind of the whole point of the book of Job, but you know, who am I to say? But anyway, I'm gonna end the stream here. Thank you guys for being here. Peace out. Catch you guys in the next one.